Good morning and welcome to Rising. We have a great show for you today. I'm Amber Duke, back at the desk, joined for the first time by Atiba Madyun. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, glad to have you here.
So what happens when the people at the heart of a national epidemic response are mistakenly fired? The bird flu outbreak continues to infect poultry flocks and now humans and dairy cattle across the country. As egg prices skyrocket, a dozen costing over $12 in some areas. But the Agricultural Department is struggling to rehire employees who were vital in response to the virus's outbreak, but were mistakenly fired. 25% of employees who worked in the National Animal Health Laboratory Network program office, including scientists and inspectors, lost their jobs last week. The positions were cut as part of the Trump administration's vast overhaul of government workers. The office, which is deemed the front line of surveillance for the bird flu outbreak, ensures that labs across the country conduct the proper tests to accurately track animal diseases. It only had a staff of 14.
A USDA spokesperson told NBC, although several positions supporting bird flu efforts were notified of their terminations, we are working to swiftly rectify the situation and rescind those letters. USDA's Food Safety and Inspection Service frontline positions are considered public safety positions.
As bird flu continues to spread, the concerns over a lack of staffing is rising. The USDA is pulling at straws to bring employees back, and they're not getting very far. USDA supervisors have been told they need to write a justification for every bird flu employee called back. Politico reports some who were rehired this week don't even have their laptops yet, and it's unclear if the rest of the workers will accept the return offers. Two people who were reinstated already received emails urging them to accept the administration's deferred resignation plan, according to Politico. I don't know if people are going to come back, one USDA employee said. Now, there's this perception that federal jobs are not secure. I think they permanently damage these services. Senator Amy Klobuchar weighed in. Understand, USDA is now fast-tracking to rehire frontline employees working on bird flu outbreaks. They were accidentally fired by the administration. Translation, nice job, Musk. You and your friends will still get your tax breaks, but higher egg prices for everyone. And Senator Chris Van Hollen posted on X, this is what happens when you let a bunch of inexperienced hacks tear down vital government agencies and services. This is not a game. Elon Musk and the Doge boys are playing with people's lives and our national security, and we need to shut them down.
All right, so the sort of crux of this story is that they say that the Trump administration was firing members of the USDA who were responsible for tracking and helping to stop bird flu, and now they say that they need to rehire those employees because they were reportedly instrumental in the response. Now, I would want to know some more details about what specific jobs were cut from this program and what specifically these people were doing. Some of the reports from the USDA indicate that these were more administrative roles as opposed to people who were actually involved in the scientific aspect of the response. But overall, I would just express some skepticism about this because we have seen over the past 2 years, 3 years now, that the bird flu has been spreading, that there have been 166 million birds who have died either from deaths related to the virus that they caught or from intentional calling from the USDA program, which they say is to prevent the spread. But the spread hasn't been stopped to this point. So I think it's time now to start thinking of maybe some more creative solutions to stopping bird flu because the culling program isn't working. We know that the infections in most humans have been mild. There was one death in January of 2025, which I believe was before Trump took office. So I think the rush to judgment to blame Doge and Musk for what's been happening with bird flu seems awfully premature.
Well, that's a lot to pack in, but let's look at why in the last administration, why were they killing birds? And a lot of it was to keep the spread from happening. We saw a mismanagement of a disease, of a virus that went global in 2020. So this is not new in terms of what we've seen at this administration. I call it year 5 in terms of how they're handling this. But overall, the reason why they're bringing back USDA employees or looking to bring back some of these USDA employees is because they have expertise in this particular area. And clearly, you can't bring someone in who has not had experience working on this. I think there were 2 cats that died in Washington State and 1 in Oregon State from bird flu. So now we've seen that there's a transfer from birds to cats. The next step will end up being humans. And if it gets into humans and it becomes a spread, we've already seen a mismanagement of a virus in 2020. Do we want to see the same thing happen with bird flu with humans in 2025?
I agree. There was a mismanagement of COVID, but I would say probably from a different perspective than you think. I thought the lockdowns were a huge mistake that prevented people who were mostly healthy, who didn't have comorbidities, from being able to develop natural immunity, which led to this virus basically laying dormant for quite some time. And we should have had more targeted lockdowns towards the most vulnerable populations. So I view this as a continuation of this sort of old way of thinking about viruses and this reflexive means of trying to have this massive culling program, which I would view as similar to the lockdowns, and trying to contain something that so far has been jumping to humans in very limited cases, mostly people who work directly on poultry farms, but we haven't seen any cases yet of human-to-human spread.
It's usually limited in the beginning, and that's the reason why you have experts to help it so that it doesn't spread. Because what happens because this is what happens with a virus. A virus mutates. So once the virus gets into a person, and the reason why we had to have mandatory lockdowns in 2020 was not because that all of a sudden we just want to keep people from being able to move about. It was because the virus was mutating so fast that we would not have been able to catch a vaccine to help stop the spread. Yes, there were some people who were very healthy who were able to get through it, but there were a lot of people also who were very healthy who contracted the disease and ended up being intubated and ended up dying.
Well, I think that's true, that in a very limited set of circumstances.
It wasn't limited. I think that if we go
healthy
back,
people. Well, if you look at the statistics of people who died from COVID, the vast majority of deaths, something like in the 90% threshold, who died from COVID were people who had multiple comorbidities or who were elderly. If you were healthy, you had a 99.9% chance of surviving COVID with very mild symptoms. And so lockdown should have been more targeted to vulnerable populations. And now I think we see the same sort of foolhardy way of attacking this bird flu epidemic, which is we're going to kill hundreds of millions of birds, and yet 3 years on, we still have apparently the exact same levels of bird flu as we did 3 years ago. So I think it's time to take a new approach, and if these scientists in the USDA were not willing to adapt to what we've been learning about this bird flu virus, which is, again, very mild symptoms in humans. So far, there have only been 60 to 70 cases in the United States with 1 death, which was, again, prior to when Trump took office. There's been no human-to-human spread across 3 years. I hear your point that viruses mutate, but I think it would have mutated over 3 years by now if that was going to happen. And so now we have people suddenly caring about egg prices when they didn't care for the 2 previous years under Biden when all of the chickens were being killed. And it just seems a little bit dishonest to me.
I don't think egg prices were $12 to $14 for a dozen. And today marks the 5-year anniversary from the first reported COVID death here in the United States. So, we can go back and we can rehash a lot of the things that happened with COVID and what people felt was mismanagement. What we do know is that there was mismanagement that happened with the disease, and more Americans lost their lives than needed to have lost their lives because of the mismanagement of the disease, because of the politicization of an issue that ended up having dire human and health impact on all of us. When we look back at how that happened, and when we look forward to today, the issue that I think overall is how are we protecting all American lives and not just looking at how we're just how it was handled then, how are we doing a better job of it now?
And unfortunately, this situation suggests to me we haven't really learned our lessons because during COVID, what we saw from studies after the fact related to the lockdowns, there was a Johns Hopkins study about the effectiveness of the lockdowns, and they found that they actually didn't prevent deaths. And in fact, there were a lot of latent deaths related to basically things that were caused by the lockdowns, like loneliness, addiction, people not getting cancer screenings, people not going to the doctor when they felt sick because they weren't supposed to, because they were supposed to leave beds open for COVID patients. And those deaths that were related to COVID but not because of COVID ended up outweighing the number of lives that were saved from the lockdown. So that was one of the major problems I had with that. We're going to have to wrap. Unfortunately, I know we're going to continue to cover this issue. Next on Rising, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is set to meet with Donald Trump in Washington today to discuss the U.S.-Ukraine minerals deal. Stick around.